Hello, everybody. Welcome to tonight's live stream. Just double checking a couple of things here. I'm using once again a brand new version of OBS with some freshly laundered commits that actually allow it to use some of the fancy new functionalities. And so far, it seems to be working quite well, as a matter of fact. Although one of the reasons why I wanted to use it was to be able to dock the chat as a panel inside of OBS, and apparently Google doesn't allow that anymore. It can tell that it's running in Chromium. So probably a little bit more work needs to be done there. It considers Chromium to be something that you shouldn't be allowed to log into your Google account with because there could be some sort of security violation there. Makes sense after a fashion. We are also, in theory, using a new bot tonight, although it has not joined the chat at all. So in all likelihood, perhaps we'll just have to swap to the other one or what. That was just something that we were playing with here. If you expected the live stream yesterday, apologies. As I mentioned, I think Monday, I did not realize after I had scheduled everything out that Tuesday, which is the normal stream day, is also a day in which I had to go to the dentist in the morning because I have a crown that needed to be replaced with another crown, and part of that involved chopping the one crown completely out of my head. Hello, Ben. Welcome to the stream. And as a result of that and some stuff they had to do, I wasn't feeling particularly chatty yesterday. But now I'm all, pumped full of Tylenol and Advil, and things seem to be more or less okay. I had somewhat of a headache yesterday as well as a result of the action. Irony of ironies, the reason the crown needed to be replaced is that one time 10 years ago or more, it came out. And apparently, the rule of crowns is once the initial adhesion is broken, it's just never going to stay in the same again. So, several points over the years, just while flossing my teeth, it would pop right out of there and need to be glued in again. But I was never in a position where I could replace it at that point. So now I'm at a point where I can do that. So of course, will it come out of there easily? No, it's in there more securely, or it was, than anything had ever been in my head before. Still in all, I managed to avoid some meetings at work, so that's always exciting. Kind of concerned about how it's been more than 5 minutes, but the new bot theoretically has not shown up in the chat, presumably. Let's try this. I'm going to assume that that is not going to work because I didn't see it actually joining. And this is something I was playing with earlier, but this thing will not join. Oh, there you go. So, interesting. It just doesn't say anything. Well, that's handy. All right, well, let's click this link. Theoretically, this will do some cool stuff that we could not do with the other bot, or we could do with the other bot, but I didn't set up. Probably won't keep this one because it seems like it's more than a little complicated to figure out how to add somebody as a regular user because it requires you to provide not just the name of a user, but the URL to their channel. I don't know if anybody that watches this has channel URLs, but in any case, there are a few things that we can throw in here now if somebody needs links. So that's always exciting. As resolved for what to do for actual stuff, I have a couple of ideas of things to play with, but pretty low key because dental stuff. I just sort of want to chillax a little bit after all of that action. Ben's trying out the things there. Cool. It looks like it probably even works. Sweet, sweet. Theoretically, it can also curb spam in the unlikely event that somebody comes in and starts spamming things. But we'll see how that goes. Button to cause it to leave the channel on standby in case something goes awry, if you will. Let us. Oh, that's a page that I don't necessarily need to see. Should probably click on that thing. See if this page is actually loading anything. I think every user has a channel page. Theoretically, maybe not, because my odatnerd@gmail user doesn't have a YouTube channel associated with it yet. I can't log in as one without actually creating one. So there may be not a way to do that. I'm not sure. Do you, for example, have a YouTube channel? Because I don't know how to find it if you do, because most YouTube channel URLs are a big long funky string of text. I can't find any way to get YouTube to tell anything. I spent a long part of today actually trying to figure out how you add a user as a regular user in your chat, which gives them, more powers and exempts you from things. Yeah, all of the instructions say, yeah, you can do it for YouTube, but they don't say how, and I think I might know why. But it's an experiment, as we do here, making sure everything is up to snuff, and then I managed to actually put sugar in my coffee because the other day I didn't. I think things are probably pretty stable here as far as this thing is concerned. Still getting some good CPU usage. The very first builds of this new OBS that I compiled using the new build of Ceph did not use browser sources properly, and it was spamming the console something fierce about there not being any processing thread for requests. But I think they've resolved it now, and my Canine companion has come back. So probably time to kick things off and noodle around with some code. Remember, if you have any ideas for stuff to play around with, please do let me know. All right, here we go. This worked in test. Let's make sure it still works live. Whoop, whoop. Hello, fellows of LiveText Fanatics. Welcome to the live stream for whatever day it is today. That seems to be February the 10th, 2021. Hello, Ashwin. Welcome to the channel. And Ben's here as well. As you can see, we have a new bot going. There's a new list of commands. Mostly what they all do is splork out various links into the chat. So if we need to direct anybody to the Discord or to report a package error or an issue in the core, or see my GitHub repository for any unknowable reason, we got all that going on. Theoretically, it also does timer-based stuff as well. And be wary of using too many capital letters or too many emojis all at once, because something might happen. In the world of regular user access, if you happen to have a YouTube channel and you're in the chat right now and you know what the link is, post it in the chat. Hopefully the bot doesn't kick you, and then I will add you as a regular, which gives you the benefit of not of getting access to potentially other things if we continue to use this particular bot. Anyway, if you weren't here at the beginning, Ashwin, we're just sort of going slow, playing with a couple of ideas here. If you have anything that you'd like to work on or poke around with, please do let me know. I definitely have a channel page, but there doesn't seem to be a way to get to it from this chat. Yeah, I was hoping. What I was doing was I was looking at the backlog chat for a previous live stream to see if I could click on the name of a person to see if that would take me to the channel page, but it didn't. And then I remembered I was in a live stream for a page called vidIQ that does channel audits, just to see their advice on other people's channels and how it might relate to mine. And I noticed there that if you wanted to go to a channel, you had to sort of search for it as well. Hello, Ayush. How's everybody doing this evening? Hopefully better than me. I mean, I'm doing pretty good, I gotta say. I have taken a couple of Advil and a Tylenol, and things are in check, if you will. We are playing around with a potential new bot, which is so ninja stealth that it joined the chat but didn't say that it joined the chat. So, that was tricky. Um, yeah, may have been saying something else, but probably not overly important. As you can see here, we still have this window from last stream. Yeah, so he was asking, I assume he, she, they. Apologies if I use the incorrect pronouns. I just sort of tend to go with he. Was asking about completions. So, what exactly you were trying to create completions for the names of Python modules so that you could autocomplete them inside of Python files? Was that the general idea of what you were trying to work on there? If I remember correctly and understood correctly what it was that you asked. The easiest way to create a completion if you happen to use the package dev package. Maybe we can do some examples here. Like say we want, well, that's going to automatically complete, isn't it? Oh, actually, let's do this. Create a Python scratch buffer. So if we wanted the Sublime module, it's not in here, and the other one isn't either. And say we want to say import and the name of things. Oh, I suppose it's pulling that out of the. Yeah, let's do this. Okay. The new autocomplete system in Sublime 4 uses the symbol index for things, so we'll make sure that this is in its own window. So say you wanted to start a new plugin and you wanted to import Sublime, you want this to contain a list of modules that you use on a regular basis, right? One thing we could do is say create a new snippet and then say the content of the snippet when it expands is Sublime, and then the tab trigger for that could be, say, Sublime, and we could save this as Sublime module, for example. And now it shows up in here as one of those. And you can also do it that way. So that's one way to pull something like this off. And if you're using Sublime 4, you could even, well, you could do this anyway, I would imagine. Yeah. Whoa. That I think that's the first time I've ever seen the error color in Monakai. I think if there's a description on it, then when you come in here, you would get to see that going on. And then of course you could make another one of these also for Sublime plugin as well. But this is a pretty lengthy file. If we were to trim out the comments in this thing, and even if you decided you didn't want that, this is 7 lines of code stuff here just to have one of these things. If you want to have 10 of them, that's a lot of files to do something with. So let's say we probably don't want to do something like that, just because that's a lot of action. So what we could do is create a new completions file. And this particular command I just used here is for package dev, which creates a stub, one of these, just to give you a hint on what it is that you want to create, but you don't necessarily need to use that. This is going to be an object, a JSON object, so the first and last characters need to be those. You need to specify the scope in which all of these are going to expand, which is going to be source.python. I don't think that's something that we did in the snippet. I can't remember now, but if you use the key binding Control Alt Shift P, or in the menu there's Tools, Developer, Show Scope Name. You can see the key binding associated there. You see the pop-up, you know that this is source.python. If you happen to do it in a place where there's more stuff, don't worry, just pick the first line, source.python. That's something that happens in a lot of places in Sublime. So we could say this, and we're going to save this as, say, So just so that it's a Sublime completions file, important for this operation. Now, automatically we can see that this is going to be a lot shorter because this is 7 lines the same way as the snippet was, but it's a lot shorter overall. So what we could put in here is Sublime, and then we can go ahead and do this and add plugin for this one. And what this is doing is saying that the text Sublime, when triggered, expands out to the contents that you provide there. So now we can say Sublime and Sublime plugin and get both of those if we want them. And you could do this with multiple modules. Snippets with code folding. Yes, that's also something I was thinking of looking at here as well. By any chance, the person that sent an email, this is something that I was looking at previously with the fact that some of the snippet content sort of expanded out into text that might need to be modified, makes that perhaps slightly more complicated to do. If you're doing something like this with completion files, you can make this even more succinct if the trigger text that you're going to expand and the contents are the same. You don't need to do this with objects at all. You can just do something like this, where it's just a list of strings. And in that case, it's assumed that the text that expands out the completion and the thing that it completes are identical. So you could do that very easily. Sublime plugin. If you were to use other stuff like, say, OS, you could add OS in here. What's another library? Base64, for example, something I've worked with previously. So you can automatically pull all of those things in, which is perhaps something we'd like to do with that. How come everyone's name starts with an A? It's a very intriguing question, isn't it? You're not alphabetically first. Oh, hey, the thing over here is actually showing some stuff. Oh, look at that. The one of the benefits of the new bot is it seems to be showing me a little chart of top chatters and top commands used. So far, the top chatter is Ben because he said more things, and the top command is the command to see the list of commands that tells you what commands you can execute. That's not too shabby. So I hope, does that answer the question for what you were trying to do, Ayush? The other thing you could do, of course, is create a plugin to do this, but if the list of modules that you have is hard listed, such as this, then it's rather overkill to create a plugin for that because you can create one of these Sublime completions files. I can't remember if there's extra functionality added to these already that goes with some of the new stuff with Sublime 4, or if that's coming, like being able to specify kind information and an annotation. But for something like this, I don't know that you necessarily require something like that. One thing you could do, I suspect, take it back to this level. I think you can do this. Or no, that not allowed anymore? Oh, it's broken now, right? Hang on, what did I do? Oh, sorry, I got to take it back one more. Pardon me. You can also do this as well. If you put a /T character escape, then whatever comes after that is going to be what appears on the right-hand side. So you could give some indication of what these things are actually for, which is the older way of doing that. Perhaps that's the way that it'll be going forward in Sublime Text 4. Hard to say. And the name of this file can be anything you like. The important part is that it has the extension of Sublime-completions and that it appear inside of a package. And because I used package dev to create the new completions file, I always recommend package dev. Even if you're not a package developer, a lot of these resources that you create in order to configure your copy of Sublime Text is a package because it's the user package. It's the same files that other packages include. So these things can be quite handy. As I said, this one gives you a stub file to get you started so you don't have to remember what goes in. And it also by default tries to save itself in your user package when you save, which saves you the trouble of having to manually go there. I'm going to delete that now. I can't remember. I had a snippet, which might have been the one that was provided in an email, which I thought I had saved, but perhaps I did not. Maybe I moved it out, or maybe I was in a different machine. I can't remember now. Let's see. Main class. There we go. Yeah, all right. Let's do that. And then I will save as this into my user package. Ooh, look at that. I almost put it in the wrong place. I wonder how many times I've done that recently and confused the living tar out of myself. Packages, user. We'll save it here. Did that go to the new place? Yes, it did. So this is a snippet for C++. So C++, and the idea is, oh, it was in a file named delete me. Oh, all right, well here, let's do this then. I'll delete that one. Sometimes when I create these sample files, I use that particular name to remind myself when I come and look at it several months later that it's a file that I didn't intend to keep around, because I do that a fair bit. I had asked you in comments about code folding snippets and have mailed you also. Indeed, this is the one from the mail, the snippet that you had there. So the idea is we could type, well, that's mine, something like this, and now this first part is the first field in the snippet, which has a bunch of content in it, which looks like maybe broken. Hard to say. I haven't tried to compile this at all. Say you didn't want anything there, you tab. It comes down to actually typing stuff in here, and then the last one puts the cursor in that location. So the idea is you want to expand this snippet out, but you want everything that's in one, which is from everything from line 4 all the way down to, I think, here. Those are all the parts that are supposed to be folded, right? Right before first. I'm seeing some potential issues there, but maybe that's because you're planning on filling that out with something else. So this part is supposed to be folded after the snippet expands and the cursor ends up down here. What are potential ways to do something like this? Because one thing we can do clearly is fold things with a key binding, and there's also a command that's associated with that, right? If we did this, and then I unfolded that, if we did that same thing again, or just some of the lines, push the right key, the command is fold, and it will fold the selection, right? Whoops. So in the simplest terms, if there was a way to mark the part of this that you want to be folded with the selection, then the command can execute it. That command can be executed to fold it. Also, there is view fold, where we can give it from a plugin the list of places that we want to be folded, which, because something presumably plugin wise, pardon me, would be needed to select all of the parts of this that you want before fold is called, it's probably easier from a plugin perspective to gather that selection and then just tell the API to fold it, and then you don't have to worry about changing the selection and putting it back. Issues with this, though, are how to do that if you actually need parts of this to be expanded or modified, if you will. Like when we do this, all this part is selected by default because maybe you want to change some part of it, in which case you have to wait for two of those. We can see that there are a couple of, there's a command named next field that triggers when you navigate through a snippet like that. And there's also a previous field if you go backwards, but there's nothing that tells you how many fields the snippet has, short of trying to hand parse the snippet. And there's no way to know when it's done. There's not a snippet done expanding. There's just next field, and then you have to know that you've pressed it enough times, like so. And now it doesn't do that anymore. Now it inserts a tab because there's no more fields here. So I was pondering this, various ways that something like this could work, but they all revolve around knowing when the snippet is done being expanded. And I'm not sure that there's a good way to do that. If anybody in the chat has a suggestion for something like that, that would be cool as well. Things that come to mind involve, and I'm thinking of this in not just the context of this particular snippet, but any snippet that you might want to inject and have it fold some parts of it up, is something that's inside of the snippet itself that indicates what parts need to be folded. Like, for example, there could be one of these here and then another one here, so that the plugin could look for instances of that and know that everything from there to there is the part that needs to be folded, so it knows what region to do. And then theoretically, it could also pull those parts out after it's done because you probably don't want them inside of your file. But that doesn't leave a particularly good way to know that the snippet is done expanding. And this is why I asked in a response email, do you use Sublime Text 4, or which is what I'm using here, or Sublime Text 3? Oh, I see. So that part doesn't need to be highlighted. That's just there so that you can fold it. What about the one at the bottom? Because there's one down here as well. Is that also an area that, where does this even end? Oh, it does. What's the purpose of this particular field here? Because in that case, you're kind of already doing, such as it is, part of what I was saying there, which is marking out yeah, that's kind of interesting. Let's do this. If I was to expand this, we get commit completion. So we don't technically know $2 changes program to program. Okay. Is it necessary to put the cursor up here as well as a part of this operation? Is probably the next question. If the idea is that you need to type something more complete here, then having the cursor exit here is perhaps not as interesting, such as it is. And you could instead do something like this. Leave that out and make this a 0, like this. In which case, when you invoke the snippet, this part is the part that folds, and then you're just in. $0 is where you start coding, or is it where the $2 was where you start coding? Because this gets more. I'm not even sure what could you type in this particular one without, and then still be able to jump the cursor to the other location. Let's put that back to the way it was. So the idea would be you expand it out, fold that, type stuff here, I would imagine, and then tab goes up there, but that stops you from being able to push tab anywhere inside of the part of the code that you're typing, or you'll automatically jump up there, which is probably confusing. With a key binding, here's something to consider for this. Whoops, don't do that. If we had a key binding here, just for the sake of argument, maybe we don't want that one, but we probably do want that one. And this was insert snippet. Args of said snippet are. Now, this is the bit where I can never remember. $2 is just a small change. I comment out cin and then go back to coding in 0. I see. In that case, we might be able to hook you up with something here. Let's see. I do. Okay, but that's contents, right? I'm guessing. Okay. We probably don't want that. We probably want file. It's probably like this, right? Let's try that. Wait, what was the key that I picked? Control-Shift-H. Control-Shift-H. Yeah, okay. I should have known that probably was not correct. Name. Oh, all right. Well, I would not have guessed that. Let's try that then, shall I? Control-Shift-H. Control-Shift-H. Nope. All right, we'll do it the old-fashioned way. If there's even something in here that inserts a snippet that way. Clearly, I mostly always insert snippets using the other thing. What we're doing here should work the same for Sublime Text 3 and Sublime Text 4. Not contents, not contents. It's going to be contents all the way down, huh? Okay. Don't do that. So it's going to look like this. Okay. Control-Shift-H. Really? Am I pushing the right key? Is that not what I called this file? Because it sure looks like it is. Oop. Let's see. Oh, ha ha ha. This is the beauty of watching live streams like this, because if I do something like that while I'm recording a video, I trim that part out. Nobody gets to know that there's a lot of this action going on. Okay. So in this particular example, one thing we could do here is back this up so that if you expanded this via a key, what the it would end up doing the same thing as if you manually invoked the thing, right? And then you would fold that, jump down here, maybe do something, hit tab. So the important part is that fold at the beginning there. What we could do for something like this is the following here. We back all of this out, and then now I don't normally do this in this particular fashion. Tools, record macro, and then we expand that particular snippet. Then the next thing that we would do is fold it, and then jump to the first field. And then from that point, we can say tools, save macro, which I think should, no, huh? All right. Normally I create these manually. I would have thought that saving would automatically stop, but you never know. Okay, we'll call this, I'm calling this delete me, so I remember that I should delete it. Now, if we look at this, we can see exactly what it did here. It did the same thing that we did in our key binding. It expanded the snippet, and then it executes. Oh, it didn't do the fold. That's interesting. Let's see what happens if we do. Actually, we should change this first. That's going to be res, I think. We're just sort of working through how you might pull something like this off, and then I can provide a more seamless explanation for it in the end. This is definitely something that I have done in this file. Yeah, okay. So this key binding now executes this macro over here. So in the world of the purely theoretical, we get a little bit of this action, except that it didn't do a fold, but it did insert the snippet and then jump down to here. So if we inserted the command to fold, let's see what happens now. I would imagine that fold is a text command. Text commands should be something that are picked up in a macro. So there you go. The downside to this is that you have to use a key binding or a menu entry or a command palette entry to do it. You can't use the snippet because there's no way to know in Sublime Text 3 which snippet got executed as the result of entering the completion. In Sublime Text 4, one of the things that a plugin can do is specify that a command should be executed when the completion inserts. And in that case, this could be much more seamless. You could actually put the completion with the same name as the snippet that you're using and then have the completion expand this out. So what you want, and I'm just going to clean this up here, is something along the lines of this. Maybe we'll even tighten that up a little bit because that's a little bulky for what we got here. Whoa, don't do that, bro. This is why I don't like tabs. Okay. if you had this particular macro, we might even rename that to main class.sublime macro, like that. You still need your main class.sublime snippet as well, and then you just need a key binding such as this. And then it should theoretically do what you like. The important thing here is that these fields in the snippet that you want to fold need to come first. And however many of them there are that require folding, you need to have that many instances of this. So for example, if you wanted to fold this and you wanted to fold something down here, you would wrap this whole thing in a 2 and then duplicate this twice, like so. These should have, commas after the ends. So it folds the field, goes to the next field, folds it, goes to the next field, and then you're in the place where you're actually typing your stuff in. But for your purposes here, you want a little something like that. And you could also have this as a command palette entry as well. As a matter of fact, new file is a window command, isn't it? So with the addition of a very small plugin, you could also make something akin to this. You say new plugin from here, it automatically creates a file and puts this stub code in. This is one step removed from what you're doing there. This is a plugin that creates the file for you and then inserts a snippet into it directly from the command palette. So you wouldn't have to create the file first. But which is something that I'm thinking of fiddling with next, as a matter of fact. But you want, I think, something like this. And again, if you use Sublime Text 4, you can do this all in. I should probably change the name of this. You can do this all as one auto completion, like a standard snippet. So I can ship this off in a response to your email after the stream is done, if you would like, to show you what the key binding and the macro would look like. And again, this file could be named anything you like. It has to exist somewhere inside of your user package. So I just named it main class because that's the same name as the snippet, and that makes it a little bit easier. Clearly, we can see exactly what this has to reference the name of the file in the package, and similarly this one here. So if you change the name of the snippet, or the macro rather, you could just change that and you're good to go. So with the this is sort of something that I was thinking of before. I thought it might be a little bit more complicated if you needed to actually modify the stuff in field 1. So I shall do that once the stream is over tonight. That bracket error is a bug in that package. Oh, that's interesting. I assume it's associated with, I mean, if we were to do a little bit of that, that one's associated with there. So what's associated with this? Ah, I see. I assume it's getting confused because this is part of this preprocessor expansion. It probably is meant to associate with this as part of the struct or something, if I had to guess. If you follow in the Sublime Discord, people often ask, how could I make a variable syntax highlight, or how could I do some of these various things? And the answer is always that it's not necessarily easy to do that. And one of the reasons is the C preprocessor. This is, a prime example of that. The internals of Sublime and its bracket matching, perhaps more the syntax. I'm assuming there may be some magic going on there. It doesn't recognize that this is here because this is actually part of this type def. Theoretically, that could be something that's handled by the syntax, that might be worth raising a issue over, perhaps. Um, the default packages that ship with Sublime aren't something that I do a lot of work with because I'm not as good in syntaxes as I am in plugins and other parts of packages as a whole. Although there is something coming to the channel soonish that will come up with a small, simple toy language and show how you could create a syntax to actually syntax highlight it. The idea being that it would be a very small language with very few constructs, but just enough to show you all of the features of syntax definitions and how you would create something to do something like that. But that is a great question. Might even perhaps create something like this as a video for the channel as well. Perhaps cuts from the live stream, or maybe I'll just record something separately that is a little bit more focused in. However, I believe we solved your problem. So we get one of those. Hey, hey. Yeah, I will. Yeah. If those are the same name and I know that what the name is supposed to be, I will totally be able to recognize that now. We can close a bunch of these. Actually, we can just close this window as a whole, I would imagine, to bring us back to here. And the prior thing to that, where we were talking about using a Sublime completions file to provide code modules, is actually semi-related to something that I was pondering as a plugin, which is the idea that in a Python file that is a plugin, it would be neat if you could say TC for text command, but have it expand out this, or WC for window command, or AC for application command, or EH for event handler, or VEH for view event handler, which is something that's easy enough to set up with snippets. The issue with that, of course, being that due to my pedantic nature, I would rather that only expand in a plugin and not just in any Python file, which isn't something that a snippet technically can do because it just knows from scope. Not that it would hurt anything if it expanded in a Python file in general, but and realistically, plugins are the only Python I actually work with. But is there a way to have a plugin detect when a Python file is actually a plugin? Which I would imagine the answer to that is yes. One thing you could do is check the view file name, and if it starts with the packages path, it must be a plugin because it's inside of a thing. Actually, let's turn that off. One of the things that package control does, if we were to, or sorry, not package control, override audit, in relation to some functionality here, is knowing that this particular package is runs in the Python 3.8 plugin host, whereas this one must run in the Python 3.3 plugin host. And it only shows that for packages that actually have plugins in them. So this one doesn't say anything at all, but default is 3.8 and such. And that's done by examining the actual contents of the package as a whole. And part of that is in determining if something inside of this is a plugin, because only something with a plugin can run in a plugin host, right? So it's the only time you need. So for example, the default theme doesn't need to say what plugin host it runs in. It doesn't have any Python code in it. Google API client, on the other hand, does have Python code in it, but as you can see here, it doesn't say what version of the plugin host it runs inside of, although right now inherently it's 3.3. And the reason for that is this doesn't have any plugins in it. It has Python code, but it doesn't have any top level plugins, so they don't count. So I actually have code that could determine that as well. So the thing that really is the statistical outlier on determining if a Python buffer is a plugin is something like this, which, as we can see, is a plugin, but it doesn't have a file name. So there's not really any way to check that way. However, if we were to look in the, is it not? No, it's not, is it? Okay, we'll just do it the other way. This way, when you create a new plugin, it sets the default directory setting to be the user package. This is the magic of how the save dialog knows to default a plugin or a build system or a snippet or a syntax to be stored inside of your user package and not just whatever directory. So what we could actually do is create something that says that if a view has a file name and it is rooted in the packages path, or it's an unsaved buffer that has a default directory setting and the default directory setting is set to something in the packages path, it's probably a plugin, right? In this case, we would assume it definitely is because until it has a name, we don't know for sure. And for the other, we could in fact verify if we wanted to be super pedantic that the Python file actually is, which would require that its path basically end here. It would need to be packages path, one more folder, and then the name of the file name. There can't be any more directory parts after that or it doesn't match. But that's taking things to a pedantic level perhaps even I would not go to. But if we had the ability to do that, then we could create an auto-completion plugin that injects Sublime plugin related things, which could be a more complicated snippet like expanding out a whole command. It could be something as simple as knowing about things like view methods as well. Although that one's potentially slightly more complicated because it would need to know the thing to the left is a view. Maybe because the variable is named view or view active view or something. Don't need to go too far down the rabbit hole of things that LSP could do for us. But that is sort of something that I've been toying with off and on for a while. There might even actually be a package for something like this, if I had to guess. But let's go ahead and do a little bit of that. I'm not sure that I've ever actually seen such a thing. And plus, if you know me, you know I like to reinvent the wheel. It's a great way to practice using different aspects of the API to learn a little bit more about how things actually work inside of Sublime Text packages, right? Pardon me. Anything happening over here? Boom. That's something I can worry about later. And yeah, all right. Just to double check, I like to make sure that there's nothing super cool happening in the Discord. Perhaps there's a question of some sort in there that could be a good stream topic. So let's say we create a new plugin. We'll call this, we'll just go ahead and save it as thus. Okay. View event listener or event listener? If we made it an event listener, we could make it contingent on the syntax being Python, which saves us a check, but we also need to know the file name of the view, so it may not actually apply at any given point, right? But we could do some clever caching so that we don't have to calculate it a lot. I'm thinking that might be an idea. Okay. So we may need a class for Sublime plugin.view event listener. Just sort of off the tops of my head here. It's going to get a settings object, which will give us the settings for a particular view to ask us, do we apply? And then we do a little bit something like, say, whoops. We could check if Python.Sublime syntax is thus, or perhaps like this. Settings get syntax. Look at that. I'm already mixing up my single and double quotes. If the syntax ends with Python.Sublime syntax, maybe even with a little bit of that on there, then this definitely must be Python, right? Otherwise, it's not. So that'll be like one thing. Unfortunately, because you only get settings, you don't get a view. You can't do something like check if the view has a particular file name, or check if the scope matches to be able to do something. My phone makes a lot of weird charging noises. It's not in the snappy documentation yet, but there is a way to look up syntax information for stuff based on a syntax, right? Let's go over here. I don't know if I mentioned this last stream or not, but I'm really digging this whole active pane being a slightly, or inactive panes being a slightly darker color. It really does make it a lot easier to work. It's not really something I never really gave much thought to before, but much like glowing text, something that really comes in, a lot handier than I would have thought. That be, I'm gonna guess that one. Find syntax by name. So that's going to be an instance of a syntax, right? Spell it correct. Thank you very much. Path, then name. Okay, so that's not necessarily great. It would need to be the path. So we need some sort of syntax from path. Let's try that. Syntax from path for view.settings.get syntax. That's actually kind of neat. From this, you could determine the syntax by scope instead of by the name of the file. So if someone replaced the Python syntax with something else, but it was still using the same scope, this would still work. Is it cleaner to do something like this? What happens if you do this with, yeah, okay. Definitely something like that, right? View.syntax does that too? Is that new? Also, hello, Will. I totally got your message in the Discord, but I will wait until after stream to peruse it. Hey, neat. Oh, I guess I can't do that here because I don't have a view. So I feel slightly better about not thinking of that one because this is inside of a view event lister. So inside of the init, there's not a view available, or I would have just compared it with the scope. But that really gets into that whole how much do you actually, how bulletproof do you need something to be? Do we need to worry about the situation where someone replaces the built-in Python syntax with a completely different Python syntax and doesn't name the syntax Python.Sublime syntax, but still wants to use this to create plugins for Sublime? I mean, that's particularly esoteric, but the whole thing is. Oh, I see what you're saying there. Yeah. Well, thank you very much for that. That I assume that must be new because it returns syntax there. One of the things that's on my big long list of things to do is consolidate all of the fancy new stuff from the API documentation into Snappy, but I never seem to find the time to just sit and look through it, which is partially the reason why we created in one of the previous streams, not last time, but the time before, the an easy plugin for pulling the Python files that are making up the API to be able to look in them more directly without having to manually drop to the console and do it. Um, so the theory here is that this would make the event listener know that it's definitely running inside something Python, but we want to be able to only provide completions to something that has that is a plugin and not just any old random Python file, which does skirt the bounds of the esotericness of things. But personally, really the only thing that I use Python for is plugins, but that doesn't mean that somebody else might not find this thing interesting, and then it would confuse them when they try to inject a view event listener into the middle of their Python script or similar. So um, so the two things to test here are oh well, one is there a file name that's rooted in a package? Is the default dir setting set to packages folder? If either of those two things is the case, then this is definitely a plugin. Otherwise, it's not, right? And I assume we would want to memoize that value so that it doesn't have to calculate it every time. So we might say on query completions, and then we got no view, just prefix and locations, and then return none. No completions are provided, but we could say actually we don't even need a view, do we? No, we just need well, first of all, that should be self, but if not self plugin, return none. Generate some stuff, return them. And then the magic of this would be that this memoizes the value of this so that if it once it's actually figured it out, it doesn't have to calculate it every time. Just going over the broad strokes of this because the idea of actually implementing it is kind of spooky. We might need if it's none, we don't actually know yet, right? So we could say if self dot is plugin is none, then there's something we got to do here, right? And then we could say do that. So this would probably be something like that, let's say. So the first time you call this, it's going to be none. It's going to figure out if it's a plugin or not, then set this to true or false as appropriate, and then return it. And then next time it comes in, it doesn't have to do that part. And then we would need something like on save, which I assume is a view event listener, right? Pre, post, doesn't really matter in this case. We'll say pre. That's going to be a self, and all we have to do here is say self.isPlugin is none again, because theoretically the file name might have changed, right? So then it can calculate it again, and theoretically you could save what your file name was last time so that you only have to do this again if it's different, which is maybe another way of doing this. Instead of saying isPlugin is none, it could be something else that is the name of the plugin when it was determined to be a plugin or not, and then it could just compare it or something. But I like this one. We could say there's no way to necessarily, if I'm remembering correctly, on save, I mean it happens every time. This is the point where the file name would change. You'd have to watch for what on save as to know if the file name changed. Although I guess what happens if the file is renamed? Is there something to determine that that's the case? That's sort of an interesting conundrum. I hadn't thought of that. I'm assuming, yeah. Window command. There's no on post window command for a view event listener, so there's no way for this to know. Does that point at not using a view event listener for this if we're going to cache the value anyway? No, because then you have to keep track of what view something was happening in. That seems like a big old pain in the butt. In which case, first time I've ever seen view retarget be used in anything other than a plugin that made me slightly nervous, so that's kind of neat. I suppose, along with knowing if this is a plugin or not, I guess we could in fact keep track of the file name, right? And then every time this is called, it could check to see if the file name is the same. That's just a string comparison, or maybe not even a string comparison. Maybe Python interned strings, and it would be a simple ID to be able to tell if two things were the same. I'm not sure how that works in Python, to be perfectly honest. Hang on a second here. As I apply a little bit of hand cream here. How's everybody's weather doing? We have some sort of polar vortex happening here, which makes the puppy under the desk somewhat unhappy. He doesn't like extreme cold, or at least cold that involves wind flapping his ears around. He's very sensitive about anybody touching his ears, including the power of nature. and he's also not a fan of rain. He does like snow, but he doesn't like slush. So it's unfortunate that we live in the Pacific Northwest because it snows and is fluffy for 15, sometimes 20 minutes before it starts converting into slushy grossness. And then he doesn't want to walk anymore because his feet will get wet. And he's so sweet, he's afraid he's made of sugar and he'll melt. But it has been particularly cold and uh, as a result, very dry. And I tend to dry skin in the general case, so I'm having a hell of a time. 27 degrees Celsius. Ah. Our temperature today was 27 degrees Fahrenheit. I may have mentioned that my wife is American, so I'm not allowed to reckon temperatures around the house in Celsius because she don't understand them. Uh, but I know I know enough about Fahrenheit to know that below 30, I'm not that happy. And realistically, below 50, it's starting to get a little chilly. Still shorts weather, but 50% humidity sounds really sweet right about now. I will say that, even with the temperature being hotter than it normally is. I guess that's not entirely true. We get somewheres in the vicinity of 33, 34 sometimes. 3 today? Yeah, so you somewhere near the middle of things. I have my mom and most of my family lives in Manitoba, which is, more or less right smack in the middle of the country. And yeah, they're down in the, minus 35, minus 40 Celsius type action. Even some friends in Alberta are having that particular problem. So, I realize saying that it's minus 2 Celsius, woo, or like 28 degree, 27, 28 Fahrenheit. Definitely not, the end of things. I still went for a 6 mile walk anyway. But I still like to think that I'm, better off than my coworker who moved up to the northern parts of BC and has spent the larger portion of the last couple of months doing nothing but plowing snow out of his driveway. Poor devil. Um, so we got that going on. I'm more of a if I'm honest, I'm more of a cold person than a hot person because it's easier to put on a hoodie or a thicker shirt or a sweater than it is to take a hot room and cool it down. Uh, there was a point where we were living in an apartment that had got all of the afternoon and evening sun. It was on the seventh floor, and it was an apartment building where every exterior wall was literally floor to ceiling windows. Looked like an amazing building from a distance, but it was a greenhouse inside. And when we lived there, we actually had an air conditioner set up to automatically start a couple of hours before we got home from work during the summer, which managed to cool the temperature down so that it was 85 degrees Fahrenheit inside when we got home, which was still unbearably warm, but better than the 100 plus degrees of living inside of a fishbowl. I know people that live for that sort of thing. I am not one of them. Anytime you're sticking to the chair, it's never a good time. Um, Never a ooh, yikes. Uh, Alrighty. That seems to be okay. I would just go back to here. Every now and then I'm checking out what the new bot has to say about its statistics. There's a new top chatter who we sorted out on his code code folding problem, not on my ability to talk. Hmm. And the Advil is still holding out as well. dental visits are not necessarily my favorite thing. So it makes me feel worse that this is actually something that I initiated. It wasn't something that the dentist necessarily, you know, suggested was something that I should do. I more or less went to the dentist and said, "Hey, could you make me slightly miserable in the short term and financially miserable in the longer term?" And she said, "Yeah, I could do that for you." And here we are, taking some Advils and Tylenols. Feeling better than I was yesterday, though, I will say that. Okay. So if we want to worry about a file being renamed, then we need to do something like try to catch the rename command and know that the active view is being renamed, which seems fraught. Um, I assume logging commands from the command palette works, or catching them works now, because there was a long period after input handlers were added to the command palette that commands from there weren't caught by event listeners, but I think that's been fixed now. I seem to recall. Um, but nevertheless, that's only one potential way that a file name could change. So it's probably better to know this. So we might say spitballing. Um, no, that's going to be unhappy too, isn't it? The idea being we don't necessarily need to do this so much as when we call this, we need to know if we haven't determined if this is a plugin or if it's not equal to self dot underscore file name. So every time you call this, if we haven't determined that this is a plugin yet, or maybe we have, but the file name is different, then we probably need to calculate again to see, right? Does that sound logical? And then this would have to say something like thus to make sure that the file name we're using is updated there. Generally, the idea being that every time completions are triggered, we don't necessarily want to have to keep running these checks all the time. Here's a question. Oh no. The new autocomplete has a setting that will inject brace or parentheses after something if it thinks that it's supposed to be there heuristically. Presumably, it only does that for things that it got out of the index so that it could tell if it's a function or that it examined the location in the code where it came from to do that's how it was used last time. So there's probably not a way to create a completion in a way where it would automatically put those on if the setting was there or not. I think this is the first big thing that I've done with auto completion stuff since all of the new things were added, discounting, playing with the new completion items, like thus. Uh, Lists of completion items, which is probably what we want for something like this, but that is something to consider for another day. Let's just do this. Just as a sample. So theoretically, we could say, hey, let's do some stuff. Boop, and whoops. That just worked a second ago. Why does it not work now? Oh, perhaps because I'm an idiot. Once and then never again. Okay. Okay. The gist of this whole operation is to be able to do this, but I guess we probably want maybe, whoops, something like that. I broke it again, did I? Oh, right. Just to be able to do that. Then maybe we probably also want to have, you know, building it up. The actual contents of the things is the less interesting part than being able to, really? Using the plugin that you're using to test stuff with that is the tricky. I guess we need a couple of those. And realistically, this is just debug code, so does anybody actually care? No. Okay, so something along the lines of that is what we're trying to do here. And then we could say vel to get a view event listener, or tc to get a text command, etc. But we only want it to trigger inside something that's actually a plugin and not something that's a standard thing, standard Python file. For our purposes here, I have an idea for something like this. We're going to well, that's slightly more complicated than I remember. Okay. It definitely has an unpacked path. Oh, right. Okay. This is the code from Override Audit that checks to see if a package contains plugins, something we covered a little earlier in the stream, because it only wants to display what version of the Python runtime plugins run in for packages that actually contain plugins. And in order to know that, it needs to check to see if there are any Python files. I should get around to updating my color scheme to show that subtle gray background color for code blocks like you have. Oh, you mean like in here? Does it not automatically do that for you? I don't think that's something that I added in there. I think that's... Does it work for you in Markdown, I guess, would be the thing. I have some things in here. I have these, but they're knocking the values that are there down so that they're less vivid, if you will. Like if I imagine if I commented all those out, um, those get a lot brighter, but they still go there. Ah, there you go. Yeah. So whatever you do if you have a specific color scheme for Markdown, adding that in should totally do that as well. The rules that I added here, which presumably, now that I think of it, I hopefully modified based on Mariana when I switched to it from Monakai, used the exact same colors as what was there before, but with the alpha knockdown, because I still wanted them to be there, but I wanted to, for the purposes of my own help, draw more to the actual content of the block than knowing that it's Python in this particular case. Um, So how can we say this here? Then this is the case where this, right? We need to check something like that. And here we would say self.say underscore file name is equal to self.view dot file name, because whatever happens here, it didn't have a name. We want to make sure we clobber over our saved copy of the file name with the current file name. Maybe this is something that just happens regardless after it falls out of the bottom of this thing. We'll see that in just a second, but I'm going to implement these one at a time and then see how we can tighten it up and make it less dumb. And for our purposes here, is plugin is going to be equal to this is using this version and not self.underscore file name because I'm presuming I'm going to be able to boost it down. Naively, we're going to say if you're working on a Python file and it's inside of the packages path, then presume it's a plugin. Technically, it might need to be only on the root to be a traditional plugin, but it is possible for Python files that aren't in the root of a package to also be plugins if they import Sublime and Sublime plugin and they export the symbols that they create to the plugin host. So I think that's the way to go. Let's see. Question. Do you have plans to stream on Twitch as well? It's something that I've been pondering. The couple of ideas going are to stream still on this channel and also on Twitch as well, potentially uh, a second day of the week, if you will. So there would always be one day of the week that is the stream here and then stream on Twitch as well. Just because I kind of like the ecosystem, way to say that, of Twitch, and how you can sort of build up a little community of other like streamers, which is technically also possible on YouTube, but kind of harder to nail down. Or switch to doing these live streams on the main channel instead of this one, which would only be one time a week. It would probably be a Wednesday and not a Tuesday, and the live replays would go unlisted and be added to a playlist. Because as far as I can see, having live stream playbacks on your channel can hurt you in the YouTube algorithm, because if someone is presented something that you one of your videos and nobody wants to click on it, or they don't watch a certain percentage of it, YouTube garners the idea that probably that content is disinteresting and doesn't want to show it to people, and more people want to watch a 10-minute video on tab selection than they might on 2 hours of fiddling around with this stuff. So I'm still kind of on the fence about that. I kind of like the idea of switching live streams to the main channel, just because it will provide more exposure to the live streams for people that are already subscribed to the main thing. But I do like the idea of streaming more than just one time a week, and I wouldn't do that on the main channel at all, and probably not on this one, because if too many notifications come, then people turn off notifications, and then that hurts you as well. So the long answer to that is maybe. The nice thing about Twitch is you can stream there as much as you like. I would imagine if I do stream on Twitch, it would perhaps be less focused on only Sublime stuff, which is what I normally do here, and more just on programming stuff in general. So you might even see me creating a web game of some sort if I was to stream on Twitch. Indeed, Ashwin says it's better to have a second channel for long streams and an individual one for short, concentrated videos. I've also seen, and there's like this is why nothing has been done about this yet because I've been doing a lot of research. The idea of having the live stream replay publicly findable can hurt your channel as well because it completely tanks the average view time of one of your videos. If most of your videos are 10 minutes long and people watch 5 minutes of them, then hey, you're at like 50%. But if you have a bunch of videos that are 3 hours long and someone watches 5 minutes of it, that really tanks it, which is why the consensus seems to be that the live stream would be public like it is now, but once it's done, the replay would be marked as unlisted. So you can still find it. It would be in a playlist. Anybody that wanted to go back and look could do so, but they'd have to do it uh, in a more concerted way. YouTube wouldn't show it to them, which solves that particular problem. Um, but which is kind of funny because I've always thought that the exposure on Twitch seems like or findability, I should say, on Twitch seems like it's better because, like, for example, I follow a couple of art streamers, and each one of them has a few art friends, and they have some art friends, and Twitch gives you the ability to raid into other streams or host other streams. So once you sort of build up a network of other people that are streaming the same thing as you, you can share audience in a way that you really can't on YouTube, which always made me think that Twitch has better discoverability. But by the same token, YouTube is actually kind of better for discoverability of a live stream while it's live, because if you're subscribed to someone, it would be recommended to them in the top part of the page if they've been watching your videos recently. Whereas on Twitch, you need to be in the top 0.5% of whatever topic you're in for you to show up anywhere near the top of the listing. So anybody that's just browsing by idly is never going to find you, which is also part of the reason why I kind of like to switch live streams to the main channel instead of the secondary one, because it would get more eyes on stream. Maybe just for a probationary period of a month to see how it goes. Streaming parallel on YouTube and Twitch is nice, especially for programming related streams. Indeed, do you watch other programming related streams? I spent a little bit of time casting around looking at some other stuff that people are doing. Uh, Statistical outlier in using Sublime and not Visual Studio Code. But, I have a brand, dang it, and shirts that people are dang jealous about. I've been getting a lot, a lot of messages for people asking me, where can I get that shirt? You'll be in the top 1%, definitely. I doubt anyone streams Sublime plugin development. Yeah, I tried searching for Sublime just in general, and the only hits that came up were people that were playing the band. Yeah, competitive programming, I think, is not necessarily my bag. I like to work on problems like the one that we're working on here, potential solutions to said problems. Um, I've always been a game development fan. I think I've shared stories recently about one of my November projects was creating Dr. Mario as a web application, but uh, after all was said and done, I needed a place to host it in a way where people could play it if they wanted to or download the source code. And I thought, what the heck? I'll throw it on itch. You can put anything, you don't need a special account or you need an account on itch, but you don't need to do anything special to get one. You can host whatever you like. And Nintendo did a big sweep through itch, and anything that had a name even vaguely tangentially related to anything Nintendo related got a DMCA takedown. So I deleted the page, but I always like to think I think I made it as an indie game developer because Nintendo tried to take down my game. I always end up backseat programming if I actively watch someone doing work. Well, I thank you very much for, pointing out how there's a lot of stuff that I do in these things that could actually be made a lot tighter. I do like to err on the side of, I like to make it work and then make it pretty. And I'm laboring under the delusion that somebody might be watching, wanting to know a little bit about how plugin development works, and then you want to make sure that it's something that's easily understandable. When realistically, there's just a lot of stuff that doesn't necessarily occur to me in the moment. Although I will say, when you're keeping up a running dialogue of everything that you're doing, it is a little bit harder to get some things in the old brain pan to sort of evaporate into nothingness. But I do enjoy the back and forth with the chat as well, which is why I want to stream more. I'd also like to stream at other times of the day as well, but that is harder to come by time wise, unless I could convince my boss to give me one day off a week to stream early in the morning or something. Or maybe I could wake up at like 2 o'clock in the morning and stream then for people in other parts of the world. And then, go to bed at 3 o'clock in the afternoon or something. I think we probably want something like this. No, and that was already there, so we don't actually care. Now, again, we're getting into an area where I'm probably doing this in a way where it could be a lot more succinct, but I like to, puzzle the logic of that out and then see where it takes me. Please make your Discord channel. We could give lots of suggestions for videos on Sublime and also have our own Sublime community. Ooh, look, enough people said enough things in enough period of time that the timer went off. Whoop, whoop. I shall indeed consider that. As a matter of fact, part of the reason why I'm testing out Nightbot here instead of the Stream Elements bot is because it also has integrations with Discord as well. Something that I'm also tinkering with is the idea of providing or turning on rather channel memberships on the main channel, which would be an avenue for anybody that was interested in being able to subscribe in a monetary way to provide more support for stuff like better cameras and lighting and uh, more microphones and such. The struggle there is coming up with a tier system for what sort of action I could provide to anybody that wanted to do that. So that's very much I can't imagine anybody would want to do that. I'm very, awful in self-promoting type stuff. But I will indeed take that under advisement. So here, I guess this is probably this, right? This is actually the wrong thing here. This is actually base. If I did that correctly. So realistically, this is more or less the same. Oh, probably don't need that, right? If the file name is none, then you want to compare this based on the default directory. Otherwise, you want to compare it based on the name of the file, and whether or not it is or not depends on whether the file name or the base name is rooted in the packages path, right? So we could say base is equal to self.view.filename or self. Whoops. Settings get defaulter, and then whoops, and this, whoops. By the way, empirically, I've noticed that you know, using the key binding for joining is clearly the one that was set to the new stuff, which I to be able to do that. Whoops, that's not what I meant to do. I do find myself pressing Control K far more than I ever ever did before, but that seems to have been an easy brain patch, if you will, to know that the key for joining is now slightly different than what it used to be. Um, so the new functionality for being able to do that is totally cool. If you were casting about for any thoughts on that, because I noted that a couple of people in the Discord after the build came out said, "Oh wait, no, I use that key," but now it's too late. It's being taken over for the greater good. Uh, According to me, this is probably going to do a thing. If we don't know if this is a plugin yet or the file name isn't the name as same as it was before, then we need to compare if it's a plugin or not. We maybe do a little bit of that. The thing we're looking at is either the name of the file name of this view, or if it doesn't have one yet, if it has a setting that specifies where it's going to be saved. And then it's a plugin if either the file name or that default directory starts with the packages path, which again could be some path inside of a package, but because it's technically possible for something like that to still be used as a plugin in the certain circumstances where you import the appropriate things, I'm going to say that's cool. It stores that value, and then it stores whatever the file name is right now. So initially they're both none. So if it was an unsaved file, the file name would end up being none, but is plugin would be true, and self view file name and self underscore file name would be the same the second time through, so it wouldn't do anything. So I think what that means is in the world of the technically fingers crossed. And incidentally, one of the things that I'm thinking about creating, which I believe was mentioned by Ashwin in a stream a little ways back, is a watch this kind of drop in the channel before something goes on here. We'll do something like this. If I said this, it will trigger because this is definitely a plugin. Even after I save that, this is definitely a plugin. But if I made a Python buffer, this isn't a plugin. No, sir, it's not. But if we set what the base directory was supposed to be to that, would it work now? No, the file name didn't change. That's not necessarily something that would happen here, right? Let's do that. Let's say the assumption of that particular code would be that this was set before that triggers. But I'm not sure what order that actually happens in. Or, it's just broken. Let's see. And base. Let's see what it's doing. Maybe we'll stop it from being broken. Okay. Didn't have a file name. Oh, did I said base dir and not default dir, didn't I? I was thinking of something I was working on earlier. So in that case, Now it works. Cool. But pretty pleased with that as an operation, realistically. All that leaves is coming up with the list of event listeners. And we probably want, this would be a list of actual objects, right? Are completions case sensitive? I can't remember. Do. Completion is this. Kind, sublime.kind snippet. I'm assuming because it's a code snippet, that is the way to go for something like that. So, did I break it? Find. What? What I do? Oh, right. Perhaps a little something more correct is what we want here. Cool. Oh, do that every time. All right, so that is a event listener. That's cool. Boop. We could put as many of those in there as we like. And we know that it's a snippet. Now, should this be like a class? Because that's what it's injecting? Kind of seems, oh, sorry, it's Open API, isn't it? Developer, Open API files. We say we want this one. Because I can never remember these things. Function, variable, snippet. Actually, that's totally in the documentation, isn't it? I have a feeling. A keyword. You want a type when it represents a class struct interface, etc. So maybe this could be kind type instead. Don't know that that's necessarily function, method, constructor, or subroutine. Probably not a namespace. It's not a navigation, and it's not a markup. Snippet really seems like the better thing to put in there because it's a snippet of code. So I'm going to stick with that, and I'm going to unbreak that. So as prototypes go, that's pretty simplistic. Now, clearly, what we would also need here is a cooler way to get at or store the completions that are actually going to be injected in here. We could look, for example, at how, I guess I could create my own kind for that to put the appropriate C in if I wanted to do something like that. Oh, interesting. I, it's been a while since I've looked at this as well, but this is sort of like the list of properties that would be injected. Our thing is a little bit more complicated than that, but we would want to have something like this, I assume, sort of in line in here, sort of in the same way that new templates this is doing uh, with the actual plugin code itself. I don't think you want to try to load these from files. Then we got to come up with a list of what we would like to have in there. Event listener, view event listener, the different types of commands at the very least with stubs. The idea being that we could do something like that and it would automatically have uh, an event in there. And then there could also be completions for the different types of events, wherein we get a little bit more complicated with being able to determine if a point is inside of a class that represents something like that. But this is something that's just sort of been bumbling around in the back of my head for a while for something that I like to do because I do spend a lot of time working on plugins, and it seems like I should make things work more for me than against me. Though presumably if I used LSP Python and pointed it at the API stubs or some of those other stubs that have been put out there, uh, it would totally just automatically pick those out and do it with more intelligence. But I'm not really a fan of that level of auto completion. I kind of like something akin to what Sublime does out of the box with symbols that already exist is really where it's at for me. I don't need to see the list of every possible thing I could be calling that starts with an A and what all the different permutations of it are. I kind of like to look that up in other ways. I'm weird like that. However, I think that is pretty cool. We've gone for a couple hours here, and my painkillers are starting to wear off a little bit. So I think we're going to call the stream here instead of going a little bit longer. Um, Let me know in comments or perhaps in the Discord what you think about alternate streaming options. I'm thinking of running another poll on the channel because the last time I ran a poll for that, it seemed like it was an even split between Switch streaming to this channel, and then it was a 50-50 on whether or not uh, replays should stay on this channel or be on that one. And I could probably go both ways with that and upload them to this channel and keep them on the other one as well because there's only a chat history for one. This is why this is sort of a tricky topic. Um, and you can also believe that if I get into streaming on Twitch, you will know about it. Need to perhaps come up with a game to do something with. Maybe we could continue on creating, finalizing Sudoku inside of Sublime. That was one of the November projects that I worked on. And I got it to a playable state with one puzzle, but obviously there could be some extensions happening there. In any case, thanks everybody for watching and coming out and watching a Sublime Text Fanatic fiddle around with some stuff. We actually answered some user questions up there at the beginning. I will totally send out emails once the stream is officially over so you can get the files to work on stuff yourself. And hope to see you in the next live stream and in the next video on the other channel. Remember, there's links to that down in the description below. As a matter of fact, the bot now has a command to display the same thing as well. And if I was clever, I would totally know what it was, but I kind of forget at the moment. Let's see. Is it something simplistic? Yes, yes, it is. We'll just test this out. Assuming the bot responds, because we only tested this one time, theoretically that would tell you something. But I mean, just because the other ones worked doesn't mean that one will work, right? Or the bot might be lagged. Hard to say. In any case, hope to see you in the next stream. Until then, please have the sublime day.